Thank you. Oh, bless you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming.
As you see, they didn't like the film.
It's kind of pretty to look at, that's for sure.
Well, I was telling them at the beginning that I was so happy that you suggested we show this, because it's lesser known. It circulates less than other film of yours, but
It runs too long. That's
well, but it looks like such a big production. It must have been a really complicated and hard shoot.
it's probably the most difficult film to shoot that I ever was fortunate enough to make, and it was that one, and I think Hawaii was also huge. But this one, with all the musical numbers and the changes of the decades and different wigs and different makeups and nails, believe it or not, even false nails that I had to keep putting on and we didn't shoot in sequence. And so we'd break for lunch and I'd go shooting off to my dressing room, putting on more different nails, different wig, different era. And there were I think close to 90 costumes that had to be fitted. Now, you don't fit a costume just once. You fit it like 3 times. And so 90 costumes to be standing there and having hems done and arm lengths and all the bits and pieces that are necessary. Donald Brooks did the designs, and he must say he did a wonderful job. And then
And you were saying that he liked to use heavy...
He used very, very thick materials, which made me very hot on the set. But it gave such a blocked look to his clothes. But I had to get used to it for a while. And then the joy, I have to tell you, is wearing all that Cartier jewelry. Isn't it gorgeous? Ladies and gentlemen, I have to tell you, I didn't recognize what good jewelry could do for a girl until that movie. And I had a gentleman that was about 20 paces at all times behind me, a guard, and he never let me out of his sight. And the jewelry, as I say, was from Cartier's, and it does something for a girl. I don't know how to explain it, but I just came up and was flashing myself, having a wonderful time. At the end of the day, of course, I had to take it all off, but there you are. Oh, there was one wonderful night when Cartier themselves gave a wonderful party in the shop after hours, and they lent me a ring and some earrings or a necklace or something. I can't remember now. But my lovely John, who was 20 paces behind me, at the end of it, whenever I wore anything, well, I wore it a lot, outdoors, indoors. Whenever I wore expensive jewelry, I had to give it back to him immediately. The filming was completed, wherever we were, whatever we were doing. And the only way to get away from press and people, he took me down to the basement of Cartier's. Now, there's all this beautiful jewelry upstairs. The basement was full of garbage cans and dust and some rats, I think. Anyway, when I gave him back the jewelry that I'd worn that night, I felt a bit like Cinderella coming home from the ball, crazy.
As I was telling you before, when I was rewatching the film the other day, is this form where it's basically a movie about a movie. It was pretty innovative as a structure.
It doesn't quite start that way, I don't think. I'm just watching the movie of me, the movie of the documentary. That's right.
Yeah,
it was a strange conceit in a way, but it is rather unusual, I think. I don't know if there's any others like that, other movies.
I don't remember.
Well, you should know, my God.
Especially of that era, I don't remember. I thought it's kind of avant-garde in its own.
In its own. Robert Wise, the director, was a honey bun of a guy. And it was a very hard movie for me with all the choreography and recording the songs and so on. But for him, shooting all that must have been more exhausting than I wasn't thinking of him. I was so tired most of the time. But Oh, there's so many stories. I
You
don't know
you
where
had
to
done
stop.
you had done Sound of Music with him. The Sound of Music
Yes,
with him.
I knew him well, and during the end, I think I was on the 20th Century lot one day, and he and Sol Chaplin, who is a very famous co-producer with him and was very, very good musician. And they both took me to lunch at the commissary and pitched the story of Gertrude Lawrence. And I'd been asked about it before because I knew of her very well. She was a great friend, as you know, of Noel Coward and all of that. But I'd always thought that I could never do her justice and so on. But Bob and Sol Chaplin put it to me so excitingly and innovatively, and I thought if I don't emulate her too much, I tried to copy her singing voice, someday I'll find you, a little bit swooping and dipping and all of that, but I didn't think I could ever capture her because she was an amazing lady. My first husband said to me once, I said, I'm always worried about my nose, Tony Walton said. And he said, why? It's perfect. And I said, it's too big. And he said, honey, on stage with a nose like that, you don't disappear into the scenery, he said. And he said, and look at Gertie Lawrence. She had a big nose. After that, I was just fine. Never complained again.
Well, another thing that struck me after while rewatching the movie is how she started in vaudeville, those early scenes, and that's very similar to the beginning of your.
Quite similar, and of course she was English. I don't think I slept with as many guys as she did. She was quite. I mean, I don't want to put myself down, but. She was quite notorious about it. She really was. And the day she went bankrupt, which you don't see in the movie, I was told that she bought herself a Rolls Royce, put a down payment on that. I mean, that's the kind of lady she was. And the other thing was, the one thing I was hoping to do in the movie was The King and I. But the film doesn't go as far as that. And it was her last show on Broadway, where she was the most enormous hit with Yul Brynner in the movie. And I can't remember who directed that. It was some huge. Was it Weiler, maybe?
It wasn't Weiler. No.
Anyway, where was I going with this? She, in her dressing room, that was a Broadway run, and she was hugely famous for it. And I was told that she loved flowers and things in her dressing room and trees. And whenever it was spring, she'd bring in full blossoming trees just to keep herself fresh while she was working so hard, which is, I think, a lovely thing to have done. Yeah. And then she died, sadly, during the run of that King and I.
So the first, some of the first scenes are within the vaudeville period. Yes, I mean, was it like that or similar?
Yes, it was.
People throwing tomatoes.
Well, we didn't have quite as much of that, but we did have an awful lot of beer swigging and cans being thrown in the upper gallery and things on the second house Saturday night. And I toured endlessly around England long before I came to America. So yes, and the theatre itself was so like the touring days that I was in. It had all kinds of different acts, of course, but the one that Gertie does with her dad and her stepmom is very evocative of that time. Didn't you love that gentleman that threw a cabbage or something and went wicked? I loved him. He was so funny.
Now I lost my train of thought. Yeah. I was asking you about the dancing. There are 17, 18 musical numbers. I mean, it's huge.
Oh, yeah.
Wow. And dancing how hard was?
Well, the worst ones were, believe it or not, was Burlington Bertie, and then the Jenny number because of all the acrobatics. And I would say to Michael Kidd, the wonderful choreographer who was a great, great friend all his life with his wife, I would say, Michael, I can't do Risley's, which are the acrobatic leaps from person to person. And he said, well, of course you can. I said, no, I've never done it in my life. He said, if my wife Sheila can do it, who was his assistant, will you do it? And I said, oh, and of course she did it perfectly. So, and she was a bit heavier than I was, so, and taller. So I didn't have much to go on. But the one tale that is brilliant, that Michael was a wonderful sense of humor, an absolute disciplinarian, but everything mattered, really mattered, and he was very, very strict about getting it right. And we did Burlington Bertie umpteen times when I was on the floor and I had my legs raised and my chest raised and turned to the audience and lip syncing. And he did it again and again and again. And it was towards the end of the film, I think. And I finally, the only time on that movie, I said, Michael, I cannot do it, what you're asking. You ask too much. And he looked horribly crestfallen, although he was a disciplinarian. And he said, let's take a break. And so I sat on the stage with my head on, knees drawn up, my head on my lap, and just exhausted. And he came over to me. Now, he was quite short and was a wonderful dancer, but a character dancer. But we were dancing on a raised stage. So Michael came up to the stage and put his elbows on the stage, and he said, Julie, I didn't mean to upset you, he said, but I knew that when you saw it on film, you wouldn't be pleased. And I went, oh, and it completely, of course I did it again. I mean, is that not the cleverest thing to say? I've used it myself subsequently. I have. Yeah.
You said you have a favorite musical number of the...
In that show?
Yeah.
I think, funnily enough, it was probably the Pierrot number, Parisian Pierrot, because it was very stylized and I loved it. I really did. I liked doing the not Jenny, that scared me a bit, but the Limehouse Blues, but I didn't think I was as good as I could have been in that, but I loved doing Burlington Bertie, even though he asked too much. But I think, funnily enough, that very simple Parisian Pierrot was such a lovely thing to do. It was so stylized and still, and I loved it.
Another characteristic of the film is the shifts in tones, because it's a musical, then it gets melancholic, it has quiet moments, there is comedy, there is almost slapstick.
Yeah, and My Ship, for instance, was very, very hard for me to sing. It's one of my favorite songs. There are many, but the lyrics of that are so beautiful, and the tune, it's by Kurt Weill. And when I re-recorded it and actually shot it as well, it's all about hoping that one day you'll find your true love and all of that. And I had not long been separated from my first husband, Tony, who we both loved each other till the day he passed, and I still do. But it was so evocative of my life at the time. And I had to pretend that I had a tickle in my throat and cut the recording off. And then when we filmed it, it just overwhelmed me again, because the orchestration was pretty with the piano and everything. And but I used it because it gave the right feeling for the song. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you have completely different tone in like the trial scene with the judge when you're like you're not supposed to talk.
Yeah, apparently that's true. She couldn't keep her mouth shut, an actress that she was. And Richard Crenna was so lovely, and the whole company. But Daniel Massey, I don't know if any of you know that Bruce Forsyth, who played my dad, was a very, very famous comedian in England, and toured the Vaudevilles as much as I did. Yeah, he's a lovely guy.
So Daniel Massey was Noel Coward's godson, correct?
He is Coward's godson. He was, yes.
So how do you think that played into the his acting
as Coward? Yeah. Well, I'd met Coward earlier in my life, and very lovely man, caustic as hell if he wanted to be, but very dear. And he hardly had time for me. I was in My Fair Lady. And then like 10 years later, I saw him at the opening of West Side Story in London. And he looked at me and said, "Oh, dear lady, what have you done to yourself? You look wonderful." And I thought, "Oh, thanks so much." What have you done? Facelift the whole thing. No.
Now raise your hand if you have questions. Okay, let's start here. Yeah.
Hi, Julie. My name's Sarah. I was probably the only 7-year-old writing you fan mail in 2004. But I'm a big fan of yours. I'm so excited to be here.
Thank you.
So my question is about your speech after you won Best Actress. Or was it a Golden Globe or an Academy
Speech
Award?
to do with...
your role in Mary Poppins when you thanked Jack Warner.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. Oh, that one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Did you plan to do that?
It happened on the night.
Okay.
And one of the producers of Poppins was sitting. It was at the Emmy Awards, and I was Golden Globes. I beg your pardon. Golden. Thank you, darling. That's my daughter over there, so she knows. And that's my grandson over there. And anyway, having said that, the co-producer, one of the co-producers of Poppins, we were all at the table that night at the Golden Globes, and he said, "You know what you should do is thank him." And I said, "Oh, I couldn't, could I?" He said, "Julie, if you do, it'll bring the house down." And with enormous trepidation, because Jack Warner was right there in the front, I went up and said what I said. And there was this awful silence for 1 second. And I thought, that's the end of my career. I'm not going to last in Hollywood. I said that if it hadn't been for, I have to thank him profusely, because if it hadn't been for him, I wouldn't have been in My Fair Lady. So in Mary Poppins. So I was so glad he turned me down for My Fair Lady. But it's the people just suddenly went, "Wow!" And thank God the laughter came. But that's how it happened. Chutzpah it took, yeah. Yes.
Yeah. A microphone. Yeah.
Hello.
Hi, my name is Jean. I met you at your book signing a couple years ago, and you were so lovely. And I came back again. I drove 3 hours again, so you're lovely. But I wanted to know, like, you seem to stay friends with so many of your male co-stars,
And
like
female, I have to say, yes.
Dick Van Dyke and Christopher Plummer, and I noticed
Mary Tyler Moore and people like that. Yeah.
right. And I noticed there's the gentleman that was played Sir Tony is still around. Did you stay in touch with some of them from?
Yes,
this
I
movie?
did. It's funny in theatre and film, you forge enormous friendships because you suddenly become family for what seems like an age. And then you may not see them again, but whatever you invested in that is, you may not see them for a while, but it never is not friendly and good. That's sort of the way it goes, yeah. But Plummer I was friendly with for many, many years, and terrified of him to begin with. But that's another story. I won't talk that.
Here.
About Mary. Oh,
Yes, hello.
my name is Nan. It's nice to see you. We drove 7 hours to come see you.
You drove 7?
Yes.
No.
Yeah. Well, this is.
Well, where from?
We're from the eastern shore of Maryland.
Well, thank you so much. Isn't that
listen,
amazing?
It's our pleasure. Mary Poppins. I have a friend who is a teacher, 4th grade. 4 students are challenged. One is nonverbal.
Oh.
And one day she was asking her students to pick their favorite word out of the book they had just read. And everybody gave their name, their word. And she asked the young man who was nonverbal, and he looked at her and he said, "Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious."
That's great. Oh, I loved it. Yeah, good. That's known everywhere, I think. So we can speak to any country, any language.
Yes. I think there's a question there.
Hi, I'm Emily. Oh, that's loud.
Hi, Emily.
I only came from New York, but I promised my mom and my sister that I would tell you. They say hello. My sister got married in LA on Friday, and when they found out about this, my sister and my mom genuinely tried to cancel or move the wedding to be here. Yeah, and they got
Came at last.
My sister's husband said, "My family's coming from Chicago. I think you have to." So, but
Please give them my regards, and I'm glad they stayed and did the deed. So your question.
Yeah, so I work in production, and just seeing this movie from a logistics standpoint, I noticed that there's like basically no repeat locations and very few exteriors.
In this film?
Yeah.
In this
No,
film.
there weren't, were there?
I was wondering if you could talk about some of the logistic challenges of this, and if this was, I mean, this seems crazy to do like now. I was wondering how much of this was done on a soundstage, how much.
Well, it cost a lot less than things cost now, but we thought it cost an absolute fortune because there were so many different locations. I don't think I ever told you this, Giulia, but one of the locations was in New York City at the Music Box Theatre. Yeah, I think it was this film. And the Music Box was where Irving Berlin, the great composer of so many, Annie Get Your Gun and all of that, he had his offices. And I was fortunate enough, because we were shooting at the Music Box, to use his office as a dressing room. And at one point, the phone rang, and some mischief, maybe go, hello, and he said, may I speak to Miss Andrews? And I said, speaking. And he said, I just wanted to welcome you to my dressing room, and please feel free and comfortable there. This was a man that I admired hugely. And to phone me out of the blue at the right time was fabulous. But yes, there were many locations, and the only ones that, nothing repeated, but we did stay in New York for a while. Yeah. Yeah, I was wondering whether to do that. Have I got time?
Yeah, yes.
We shot in the south of France. We did a huge amount of stuff there. And almost the last day of filming, and we were running dreadfully over time. We were like 2 or 3 weeks late and things like that, which does happen. And the filming that we were doing was on a swimming raft out on the ocean in the south of France, just outside Nice or Cannes or somewhere. And first of all, the water was freezing, and we had not great weather, so we had to keep, if we did the take 2 or 3 times, have to go back into the water, swim up to the raft, get out, dry off, and all that kind of thing. So I sent for a brandy and some hot coffee. And whenever I got out, I was shivering, so I swigged the brandy. And just before I went back in, I had the coffee just to keep warm. And I was alternately swacked and drunk or terribly hyper, It was very silly. Anyway, poor Bob didn't finally get the shot he wanted before the rain just descended, and you have to match. So we all were told to pack up, that's it for the day, and we're going home to Hollywood tomorrow. And I never forget seeing him sitting on the camera, the big dolly camera and all of that, which was on a separate raft, looking hugely dejected and sad as I left, because he couldn't get and finish the film in France. But we did do it in front of a screen, just the very, very end of it when we got back.
And for the Cape Cod, you went to the actual theater.
Yes, I did. Yeah, and met Aldrich, the real
came,
husband. Yeah, and he said to the actor that played him, Richard.
Crenna.
Yes, of course, sweet man. And he said he introduced himself to Crenna, who was playing him, and he said, "Oh, how lovely to meet me."
Did you, when you, I'll leave it to the audience. One more here.
Hold on.
Hi. Ooh, that's loud. My name
Yeah.
is David. Hi. Question for you is: I'm a young actor at the beginning of my career. Is there a piece of advice that you've carried with you throughout your wonderful career that you would be kind enough to share with me?
Yeah, there is one which is kind of obvious, really, but I always say that I've been one of the most fortunate ladies in the world, but things have happened to me when I least expected it. And I know that if you're passionate about your craft and you want to be in theatre, that you'll work at it. But something one day will float under your nose or past your vision, and it'll be an offer or something that you weren't expecting, and it will be out of the blue, which is all that happened to me several times. And all I can tell people is when that happens, it's better that you've done your homework. Be ready, because you never know when something like that, which is so wonderful, will happen. So be ready for improvisation or whatever it is. Do your homework. That's all I could really say, you know. Thank you. I'm sure you do, but...
Last question. Okay, there.
There's two up there, darling.
I know, but she's been waiting.
Okay.
Yeah, you.
Well, 1 second, I'll give you the mic.
Thank you.
Oh, I won't give it to you.
Hi, I'm Hannah.
Well-
Oh, this is loud. Thank you so much. My question is, so coming off the heels of Mary Poppins, Sound of Music, and Hawaii, which were successes, and from what I understand, Star wasn't
No, it wasn't. You know why? It's an easy... Are you going to ask why wasn't it successful?
Well, I was going to ask how that made you feel, how you looked at your
Oh,
craft
I have
back
had
then.
more than one, believe me, my love. A lot of films that one of them, which was a drama of great intensity, opened on Christmas Day, and I think it closed the day after, but that kind of thing. But what made it not as popular as it could have been, it might have been something a bit stiff about, I don't know, the film in some way. I don't know. But I do know that at that very time, studios were investing in films that were a much cheaper budget. Things like Easy Rider was beginning to be very successful, and other ones like that. Self-productions rather than things that came out of vast studios and so on. And everybody thought, my God, what a lot of money, what a waste to have such a vast, big movie. So it was really one of the last. And we'd had huge, 20th Century Fox, where it was shot, had huge disaster with, spending way too much on Cleopatra and things like that. So it was all the history of overspending, over budgeting, everything. So it was a time change in the way films were viewed as much as anything else. That's my take on it. Yeah.
No, you know that. One more.
Okay. Whomever. Yeah.
Yeah, you have to share your question. because we have another show and yeah.
I will. Sorry. Hi, I'm Christina. My mom and my nana sang all of your songs to me as a kid. I've been a fan forever. And although there's only one Julie Andrews always, if you were to have someone do a biopic on you, who would you want it to be?
Gosh. My mother used to say to me, don't you ever pull rank. Don't you ever complain about smoke spiraling down from the circle. Don't you ever complain about a rowdy audience, because there's always someone around that can do what you do better than you. And she meant it, and I took that to heart. But as to who is now, I'm sure somebody will be there. I've always thought someone like I'm not sure, really. I'm sure it has to be an English girl, but I've always been fond of what Reese Witherspoon does. And she might be somebody that would do it very well. No! Did you think of her too? I don't think I've said that to anybody.
I'm so sorry. We have to finish it. Please let us escort Miss Andrews out before rushing. Yeah. And thank you so
it's been a pleasure.
much.
Thank you so much for coming and asking such good questions too. Thank you, darling.